It was the late 50s when I first got hooked on the idea that didn't exist yet. There was no such thing as modular. I loved the idea of sitting in my studio, being the performer and the listener, and when it goes out, I don't have to be there. I don't have to be on the stage anymore.
I got into modular when I was still in high school. My father taught at San Francisco State, University of California at San Francisco. And he taught in the humanities department, but he was a closet musician, and so he had all his buddies who were in the music department. I remember my dad walked home, and he had an album in his hand. And he turned to me and he said, "This is the future of music."
I was convinced more and more as I began to work with it that this was not a simple thing, that someone down the line is going to make an electronic organ. You cannot make a musical instrument if you want to do this. Any musical instrument is going to tell you what kind of music it's going to be, not the piece of music, the kind of music, scales, rhythms, whatever it's going to be. So I put an ad in the paper and to get an engineer, and eventually Don Buchla arrived. And we got together and we started. So what we were building, it had nothing to do with modular because there was no instrument. We were developing an analog computer for music.
Don Buchla, called the easel music box electronic musical instrument. He didn't like to use the word synthesizer. He thought of them as an instrument, and so I took that cue early on.
I didn't quite understand it, of course, but I said, he's right, this is the future of music, and I need to know what this is. Of course, it was Silver Apples of the Moon. Morton Subotnick at Mills College, using the early Buchla machines.
That record captured my attention, and at the time, I didn't know the difference between, a Moog or a Buchla. But I knew I liked the sound of Mort's record. It was just something about it that was very unorthodox, not traditional music.
My friend Mario, I was in a band with him, a guitar player, he said, "You gotta check this out." And I was bitten. Bitten. He's the guy that turned me on. First it started with, Henry VIII, the Six Wise Henry VIII, and the Yes, and Wendy Carlos, of course. And then he put on Subotnick. And everyone says Silver Apples. Mine was, Bull. And he passed the record cover around. I'm seeing the 200. And I'm like, what the fuck?
It's very gratifying to know that with that moment when I made the decision to dedicate myself to something, and from the music, I've been an inspiration to people. That's pretty nice. It's very satisfying.
In 1961, I met a musician, his name is Herb Deutsch, and I built some instruments that he could use to make different kinds of sounds.
When I met Bob, I realized this is the man to do an actual musical instrument that we could consider a synthesizer, a single kind of musical instrument.
When I began doing stuff for electronic musicians, I built modules, and each module was a little box with an input and an output that did one thing and one thing only, making a waveform, sound waveform. And you could connect these together with cables, with patch cords. We had a whole system of these things. We could put them all in a box and connect them together. So we thought of the process of making the sounds as putting the parts together, which is what synthesize means, to put together something whole out of all of its parts. When these sorts of sounds were first being heard by the general public, people were freaking out.
Probably the most important recording that was really made to open the eyes of the entire music world everywhere was Switched On Bach, and it was done by Wendy Carlos.
What Switched On Bach did was prove that you could make real music that had widespread appeal with these instruments, and I think that was the first really big shift in people's perception.
It became the fastest-selling classical music recording of the entire year, and it was only out for a month.
I had the chance recently to play on some scientific equipment, some old school Stockhausen oscillators. It was a breathtaking experience of you just have this dialed in sound that is all, pure to this kind of ridiculous point of just, it is the sine wave, it is the sound, it is the thing, and why would you ever, this is just a frequency, and yet at the same time, the building blocks of physics itself is at your fingertips.
It's the one instrument that will play back with you using random voltage. You can conduct it rather than simply tell it what to do. It will talk back to you. And I think that's what's most exciting about it, when you have this dialogue going back and forth with you and the machine.
Even though that type of sound is like a throwback, at the same time, it's still the future. People haven't fully grasped these types of frequencies.
It's like the sculptor who said, I have a block of stone and there's a tiger there, I just have to take everything away that's not the tiger. A modular is sort of like that. There's music in there, it's happening.
The default behavior of an oscillator is to keep droning, to keep making sound. An acoustic instrument is, at its resting state, silent. It does nothing. And the music that comes out of it is the result of you constantly making decisions. Whereas a modular synthesizer, you approach the other direction. Its default state is to constantly produce, and you have to kind of sculpt out of that. You have to tell it when to shut up rather than when to make sound.
Don made touch plates, various kinds of ways of articulating. The brush I always thought was an extension of the hand.
I said, Bob, yes, you should put a keyboard on it. Don't forget that in 1925, 12-tone music was created, changed the whole world of where Western music was. But it was created by a composer working with a keyboard, a piano-type keyboard. And that would allow people to play it at home and play the instrument if they like to play jazz or whatever they like to play. That was all I said. It could now become an electronic instrument.
The modules were simply the colors on a palette that made sound, others that were things you could control with. The whole idea was, if I connected them, the envelope generator is connected to the voltage-controlled amplifier, so it's for the loudness of a sound. But if you just take them separately, you say it's a control voltage. So the control voltage is how whatever you're going to do is going to change in time. You can move a sound across the room. You can change the filtering of it. It was a separate group of things that had no direct function. It was like my arm. What are you going to do with your arm? Well, it's to draw a picture. No, it's not. You can draw a picture, but you can also throw things with it. You could do anything you want with it. So they were a bunch of modules that dealt with like different kinds of brushes or different kinds of canvases. So modularity was a metaphor for a non-musical instrument.
The keyboard was used as a controller for a modular system, and the modular system was the important system. We were never in any way competitive, that is, Moog and Buchla. We were both in the same world. In my mind at that time, Buchla was going totally in the direction of the composer and the composer's imagination, and the idea of modular systems made the most sense in that world.
You know, when you and I first worked together, because of your influence on me, I thought that what we were doing together was figuring out ways to make new kinds of sounds.
Don made the control voltage with banana plugs, whereas the metaphor that Moog was using was an instrument. So everything is done with audio cables. But the offshoot of not having a high-end audio cable meant that you could stack them, and you could send voltages anywhere you want. It allowed me to do things we never even dreamed of.
Neither Bob nor I thought at that time that we're creating an instrument that would become a popular, well-known instrument. We were both thinking that this is an instrument for creative, imaginative people.
It's the physical act of patching, from starting with nothing. They do absolutely nothing without my input. To move from one piece to another, hear the sound change and hear the shape move, it becomes this addictive process, and you'll just sit in front of this thing for hours, plug in every cable you can possibly find into this thing, seeing where the heck I can go. It's engineering and reverse engineering, and engineering and reverse engineering, and just experimentation.
Part of the mindset is the collector, the baseball cards, whatever. You see the things, and you're like, oh man, that thing looks really cool. You know, but there's that part of like, what does, oh, that thing looks really cool mean? It means, oh, I think I can find a new way of finding myself in that module.
It's Legos for electronics, that's all it is. So every module is a different Lego brick and they all talk the same language. So you put them in a box and they all talk to each other and that's it. They're just Lego bricks. That's how I always explain it to people.
Your point about the instrument sort of defining a character and a style of composition and a style of sound design, I think is very true.
I think it's really natural for people to make music, and that we can make music with all kinds of tools. For me, it's about experiencing all of these things more than it is about finding the perfect representation of myself.
I've always been fascinated with timbre, tone color, how things change sonically. I'm still fascinated every day, just listening to the sounds around. You know, and there was many hours of hardly getting any sound, but then there were these moments that blew my mind, and I realized I was actually creating timbres that I'd never heard before.
Being able to connect with what I really want to say and having the tools to do it and to then feel it actually happening, it's absolutely liberating. You feel alive in a really great way, you know, and so now when I look at it, it just looks like this strange alien creature beckoning me to come and try and control it.
It's never, despite my best efforts, it's never going to sound exactly like it did before. I can even leave the system on, come back the next day, just turn the volume up. Something's different, I swear. These circuits are moving and they're alive, they're breathing. You know, your oscillators are drifting. It's got a mind of its own, and that's kind of what I spend half my time doing, is just taming the beast.
If the type of art field you're in cannot move you to tears, my feeling is get out of it. Beethoven's Ninth, second movement of the Fifth Symphony, cannot keep a dry eye. The soundtrack to Cinema Paradiso and Moroni, these will predictably bring me weeping, okay? And then I know at that point my passion is there.
Music became part of my life very early. I played saxophone for a long time, and then when I was about 14, I got into playing guitar and writing songs, and then I started studying guitar with this terrific teacher who started to open me up to the world of composition, studying composers and actually stealing tricks from Mozart for your guitar playing as opposed to just like Jimi Hendrix or that kind of thing. And then that inspired me to go to school for music.
There was a a company called Good Cell Electronics, I think that was the name. I can't remember. It was a Hammond B3 organ repair place, and my friend Tim had worked there, but he was also a Oberheim sequential tech, and I had an Oberheim expander that was not working. So I called him on the phone, and he answers, and I think I was like 18 years old at the time, and he was like, all right, well, come bring it down. He wanted to meet me, and he's just like, at first he tried to buy it off me, but I was like, no, I know what this thing's worth. I want to keep it and make music with it. And this sparked a great relationship. We stayed best friends. So he had like 4 crates of all these records of early electronic stuff. Herbie Hancock, Kraftwerk, Stockhausen. Probably one of the most eclectic collections of early electronic music I'd ever seen, ever.
Charging our battery, and now we are full of energy.
I remember the first time I heard Stockhausen's Contact record. I mean, it was like horrifying and mystifying, and stuff from like Columbia Princeton, computer music, Barry Vaco, to like Hewlett Kane, David Tudor, John Cage. I mean, this was all music I didn't even know existed, and I was just getting this super educational kind of kick in the face, like, wow. At the time I thought the music I was listening to was like, oh, I'm listening to the coolest, weirdest, most underground music, right? And no, I wasn't.
Here in a country studio in Kent is Daphne Oram, a pioneer of a new type of music. Unlike the traditional composer, she uses no musical instruments and no musicians. She produces sounds by electronic devices, some of them sounds unlike any ever heard before.
She was an electronic music pioneer, but she invented this incredible machine called the Aramix that uses 35mm film. She actually paints on and uses light-based resistors to synthesize sounds. It's a synthesizer, and she built it long before any of these were around. If you ever see a photo of her or hear her talking, she's all put together in prim and proper, pearls and a 2-piece suit, and then she plays her music, and it is terrifying. It's so intense and charged. She's not apologizing to anybody. It's her voice, and she built that machine in her living room, and I always found that so inspiring because she could have used other tools, but she made her own thing. It helped her find her voice, and it's amazing. And the music she made is just really something else.
Those records had such a profound effect on me. It was like listening to this organic organism growing, picturing like watercolors bleeding on a paper and the colors kind of meshing all together. It sounded to me like the closest thing to nature that I could think of. I just never heard anything like that before, and it just fascinated me. I just wanted to know more.
My inspiration is definitely from nature, for sure. I always liked the contrast of a really alien instrument that's very industrial and at the same time very organic. I have a lot of artist inspiration. Definitely Austin Cairns, Ari Benny, for sure. Earlier, I guess, ambient works, Boards of Canada, for sure. Cool bands like Blockhead and The Album Leaf are definitely inspirations for me, but kind of the modular take on that.
The kid out there with his minimal modular setup, and he's sitting there by himself making this awesome piece of music. I see it, and I get totally excited and kind of influenced. Like, oh, that's a really great take on a way to use that I hadn't even thought about, because it inspires me.
I love music that makes you think about structures and patterns. A lot of things that you see in nature sometimes are hard to explain, it puts you in a certain headspace. And I love that. I love art and music that kind of puts you in a position where it takes you to a completely different realm. I still have that spirit of experimentation and free-flowing organic randomness. That, to me, is one of the most beautiful things about music, you know, especially making music with modular stuff. You're making it with electricity, you know, like it's these interactions between cables and fluctuations of current. I like it to sound exactly like that. You've created this patch, you're capturing this one moment in time that will never happen again, and then it's gone forever.
1, 2, 3, 4. Get up, get on up, get up, get on up. Stay on the scene, get on up like a sex machine. Get on up, get up.
I became an enthusiast towards the sound from records, not knowing how they were made, but I began DJing it in the scene, these kind of conundrum of sounds where they were taking like James Brown breaks and mashing it against like 303 acid bass lines and all this, a polyamory of sounds. They were all loving each other, but I didn't know how they all fit.
My cousin Mario, his uncle was already like a mobile DJ. He already had a little posse with him. We kind of looked up to him. He showed us a video of DJ Qbert, just seeing all the craziness of the scratching, this wild turntablism. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. That's something that we want to get down with. And we would go to his place all the time and just mess around with experimenting with sound.
Like 9 Inch Nails, of course, who use electronics in a way that really spoke to me. Alessandro Cortini, he can create these really beautiful soundscapes with just a Buchla music easel, or Richard Devine coming up with these sounds that are just changing and ever evolving so quickly that I don't have time to think about how they're made, and that's why it's beautiful to me. I like modular synthesizers because I don't know what I'm going to come up with when I touch it. That's what's exciting. It's the unexpected.
Total hip-hop fanatic. I had a huge record collection. I inherited everybody's record collection in my family, so I had jazz from my grandmother, like funk and soul from my uncle. My mom was a hippie, so I had like a lot of like psychedelic rock and that kind of stuff from her. And then my personal music that I discovered was hip hop, and that's what got me heavily into gear, like learning how hip hop was made. So I got a sampler. Favorite producers: Pete Rock, DJ Premier, Marley Marl from the '80s, like '88. Freddie Hubbard was a favorite. Ron Carter was a favorite. Roy Ayers. Roy Ayers was actually grew up with my grandmother. Grew up with Roy Ayers and his sister, so that was kind of close to home. Yeah, those are my favorites.
I was really into like alternative rock when I was a teenager. But then I went to my first rave and I got really into electronic music. So house and techno, drum and bass, trip hop, stuff like that. Ever since then, I was like, I'm really attracted to like 8-bit sounds and Nintendo sounds. I still like to use those as like samples sometimes too. There's been a few times where I like connected to the modular in this way. It just like clicked and made sense and everything just felt perfect. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm like doing it. And Now I just live for those moments. It's just like an extension of myself or like this energy, but it's not like me sometimes. Yeah, I guess I found my voice within modular. That's what's awesome.
It's better that you should rush upon this blade than enter the circle with fear in your heart.
I went on YouTube, and of course I type up like modular synth, and I see this video from Cell Dweller.
It's Clayton, and welcome to a Cell Dweller production.
He showed his studio. I'm like, look at all that gear. And he's got a huge board and all these other vintage things, but he's got this Boeing kind of, setup and all these little modules. Like, what is this? And then he's like, let me show you the Hertz donut. And then he took the two oscillators and went, oh my, that was it.
I was like, oh, maybe I should build one of those Moog things. Like maybe there's like project synthesizers and I can build one on my own. And I found Muff Wiggler and found this whole community of modular synthesis, and I found this thing called Eurorack. The options found in Eurorack was like, wow. I was hooked and just started ordering stuff and getting excited every day after work when the UPS man would be there. And my girlfriend at the time was not very happy because like when those packages would come, it was like I was like pushed the world away, and it was like all about modular.
Growing up, listening to the Beatles, listening to Nirvana, listening to pop punk, and then listening to things that are really melodic, the way I've sort of designed my modular is to provide a range of moods, a range of feelings, but ultimately musical. I appreciate sort of noisier, sort of more challenging, abrasive music, but really like what I'm going for is that sense of being able to be interesting and challenge, but not in a way that's alienating. What really sort of made me jump into modular was Emily Sprague's videos. Her and Arbeni, and then eventually found Brian. But as soon as I get a YouTube notice for one of their new videos, I am like on YouTube, want to be like, whoa. So I find them to be really inspiring. And so I'm like talking to these people who I find are my inspirations.
You're traveling through another dimension. That's the signpost up ahead. Your next stop, the light bath zone.
Tides is a very special module to me. It was my first module. I had an event at the cabin in the Catskills where I was staying. I invited Emily Sprague and a few other good friends to come play. I was playing the last set. I had just split with my wife at that time, and I was decimated, but I didn't want to cancel this event. I was like, I really want to meet Emily in person. I want to have this thing. I've already been planning on it. I'm just going to do it. And that set I played is seriously the best live set I've played ever, but I was just so open and raw. I just didn't give up. It was like, man, I'm just going to go. And the energy was just there. And here's what happened. I'm playing the set, and I've got my SH-101, so I can play some like total improvised melodies on top of what's happening. I play 4 notes, and I go, that's the Firebird Suite. That's Stravinsky. And I kept playing it. I did not intend to play the Firebird. And I just kept playing it. And so after I was editing that video, and it all hit me, I was like, oh, that's my Firebird set. that's where I was. Yeah, I'm actually expressing who I am in that moment. It was a reflection of where I was, and it came through in a beautiful way.
All the ideas for my modules come from me like working on something and being like, oh, what if there was like a way to do this that was like kind of messed up and weird and different.
A lot of the stuff I do reflects the process I do in music, and I've noticed that with all the other designers. Their process, the modules that they design, is a direct reflection of how they approach music.
I spend a lot of time making music with modular still, and just frequently I'm like, I really need a 6 HP module that gives me, X, Y, or Z. But I just imagine it filling a niche. They often change, but that's the sort of starting point, is just an immediate need that I have.
Well, we work together, and sometimes we'll have a great idea, and we'll say, hey, what about this? And they'll say, oh, that's awesome. And other times they'll have a great idea, and we'll be like, whoa, that's a great idea. So we work together. It's collaboration.
I made a thing, and I know what it does, and I like to do what I like to do with it, but then I see someone just take it to a whole different place, and I'm like, wow, it's like seeing your kid do something that you didn't teach them. Like, where did you learn that? It's amazing. It like learned it on its own. That's like the best reward, and I feel like my favorite things have that quality where like I learned something about them after I made them, which is cool.
I wanted to get electronic sound. I knew that I was able to get it out of an oscillator, and I knew that I could buy oscillators from a radio store. We had been together by that time only a few days. Bob had set up a keyboard instrument, which was just a basic keyboard. He wasn't using the circuits at all because he was designing the circuits himself. That was really what we were doing together. I could play a note on the organ, and we could tune an oscillator, and the organ would play that sound. But at one point, and it was only after a couple of days, I said, well, there's one big problem here. There's no articulation on this instrument. And I remember Bob said, what is that? I said, well, it's a musical term. When you play a piano, when you press the key down, there's an attack on a string, but if you keep your finger on it, the damper off the string is holding up and the sound will decay slowly. I said, you need to have some way of creating an attack and a decay on a note. And Bob immediately knew that we could do it. He said, do me a favor, go across the street and a little hardware store there, pick up a doorbell button. I said, okay. I think it cost 35 cents. Then he had already figured out what to do, and within an hour or so, he was able to build a setup so that when you struck a note, it would trigger. And we developed the whole idea of attack, decay, sustain, and release. It seemed perfectly logical to me. I had no idea what he was doing at the time, but he knew exactly what he was doing. It's a wonderful, true story about one of the most important parts of the basic synthesizer.
Folks like Herb, they were in the thick of it, because everything before the synthesizer was
musique concrète, electroacoustic music. You know, you kind of had experimental, artistic types right out of the end of World War II. You know, the world was a place where it was kind of like, we want things to change. We don't want things to be, this is not what I want out of reality. How do I do something new in a new way? And what they were doing is they were taking, you know, a test oscillator and all of these things that weren't designed for music. They were taking all these things, hooking them up in a way that they weren't designed to be hooked up, but they were starting to get into the areas they wanted to get into. And they, you know, hey Bob Moog, hey Tom Oberheim, hey Don Buchla, we've gotten this far, and I know that you know how to get us the rest of the way. And then it just, you know, it takes off.
My neighbor bought a relatively nice UX system, but it was the more modern stuff, which was a lot more interesting, a lot more weird ideas, and more like, oh, there's something going on here. I would look at the modules, and it's just my personality, I would start critiquing them and telling him what was wrong with all the modules that he had just bought. And he basically was like, if you know what you're talking about, why don't you make me a module? And so I put together a prototype over the weekend and brought it back into him, and he was like, oh, okay. Which is what became the first product that became, you know, this is pre-brand, pre-anything, but the Ataraxic Transitron was the product of that. I need to make a product. This sounds like just a fun thing to do. We made like 150 of them, and they were sold out within a few months, and so it's like, oh, okay, I was just doing this as a stunt, but there's something going on here.
When we develop a new module, we always try to think about how people are going to use it. That always goes into the design. In fact, we have done hardware revisions just to move a knob down at, you know, 0.5 centimeter, because we think it's going to be better functionality.
One of my favorites is actually modules that friends or just other people, musicians, really suggest to us, and we work with them to make something that they particularly want or are particularly interested in.
A lot of our stuff tends to be more focused on live use. And I don't think that if you're using it for live use, at least in terms of the controls and the positioning, it's going to hinder use in the studio. So we try to design with both, with pretty much every kind of utility and use in mind, pack as much as we possibly can into a small footprint.
That's the beauty of the modular system. You start with a module or two, or, you know, if you're smart, you start with a module or two, right? And you build out this system that's yours, right? It's growing from that sound that you're trying to actually create, that patch you're trying to achieve, you know? It's an organic growth. Anybody's system is.
The process of creating an instrument other humans are going to use to express themselves really lends itself to necessitating a collaborative process. You know, it's not something that just one person can sit down and dream up what everyone else's challenges are going to be or what everyone else wants to do, you know, with an instrument at the end of the day, but it's something that we all need to work together, we all need to listen to each other, we all need to understand each other to really end up with the best possible instrument.
You need to have that interaction between the instrument and the creator, and like you're putting your talent into that instrument. Each one of these systems is slightly different. Some subtle things are going to be different from system to system, and I think that's really important, especially from where we come from. You know, we've been around from the 60s. We have this long echo of history. This is the one project, in my opinion, that really resonates back to that original Bob ethos. Like, we're still doing it the same way.
Bob was always one to put customer feedback and customers first, and that's something that we continue to do. That's the foundation of all our designs, is to guarantee highest quality, best experience. We don't want any sort of walls between the customer and their end creative process. We are continuing to try to advance technologies, and we always want to stay ahead of the game to offer an instrument that is relevant to the needs of the current customer base.
The amount of creative energy that's felt around here, it's an amazing feeling.
If you have the right idea, you can execute it with many different pieces of gear. Like for me personally, I feel like I connected with the Mother 32. That was kind of a chance connection with a piece of gear that somehow crossed my path, and I feel very connected with it. I love the Make Noise stuff. Obviously, I use a lot of it. It's my kind of Franken rig now. Everything is in different places.
We want to know that what we're creating is going to be useful musically in a lot of different hands. We also have a lot of beta testers who are artists who we've worked with over the years who give us a lot of valuable feedback.
It's always amazing to me that there's even an avenue for new releases. So I'm just glad that people are still excited about what we're doing. So we'll just keep doing it.
I was working on my 5th album, and I wanted to do something new. Previous couple records before that, I focused a lot on software. I thought if I was going to do that again, that I wanted to find a way to generate just new sounds. I stumbled across the Eurorack format of synthesis a few years ago when it started to pop a bit. Make Noise became popular. I found the shared system. I think my loyalty lies with Make Noise. Everything they put out just seems to speak to me. I don't know if it's because a lot of it's based on the early Buchla stuff, and I happen to like the, additive style of the, complex oscillators, and there's something about Make Noise. I just love them. Yeah, fuck, I don't know. I like all of it, I really do.
I make music, but I don't have a band or a show name or a label or anything. I make music, I like it. My real, kind of unique passion is designing instruments that make music. A lot of my musical ideas, rather than going into an album that I make, goes into an instrument or a module. I wanted to just make pretty things. I felt like a lot of modules and modular, it was easy to make harsh noise, but it was hard to make pretty stuff. I needed that, I wanted that. Other musicians use those modules, and they're using my ideas. I can just go to a show and watch people play music and still hear my ideas in there if they happen to be using some of my gear. It's win-win for me.
The idea of finding your sound in somebody else's synthesizer or on an instrument, how can anyone ever play what I've played? I fully believe that if you say the thing that you're going to say, no matter how much you are aping those words of someone else, it's yours. Sound is yours.
I think that's what makes 4MS is a different approach to things, like a different workflow, a different way to think about music, a different way to create, a different way to control things, and a different experience at the end of the day. I try to leave it open and try to leave things that offer different approaches to making music or playing with sound. It's very exciting to imagine all the different use people can have and imagining the music people will make.
I've always had a background in writing electronic music and got really into the process. So I basically broke down and then started tinkering and building a couple things, and then got more into the micromanagement of sound through components than just, changing parameters on the computer. I've always had, ideas of what I wanted my music to sound like and things that I'd be reaching for, so it was a good way to evolve, or a good direction to evolve into, and it's just been kind of a all-consuming process from there. I've always had envy of guitar players and how they could just pick up guitar and with all this excitement create all this energy. And then I'm, sitting there with my kick drum, the energy just isn't happening, So I'm like thinking, what are the physical dynamics that are going on that make this guy who's shredding sound awesome when I've got just as many notes? It just doesn't have that same energy. So I started adding distortion to the synths, and it actually did up the energy level quite a bit. You're actually pushing real electrons through the circuit, and it just felt a lot more dynamic. I interact with the customers a lot, and seeing the stuff that they're doing, because it inspires me. I'm like, oh, that's a really great take on way to use that I hadn't even thought about. I'm thrilled when I see people using it in unexpected ways. I listened to Depeche Mode till I was blue in the face when I was in high school. You turn on the music and it brings back all these memories. You follow them through your whole life. They've been kind of the soundtrack to everything you've done, and inspiring you to become kind of the person that you became. And then you get a chance to, meet them and send them something and talk to them on a personal level about it. It's just amazing. You never know exactly how much your stuff is influencing them, but you hope maybe just a little bit.
I work for Cycling 74. I'm a content developer for Macs, and I spend a lot of time in it almost daily. So it's nice to sometimes get off of the computer and go to something physical, and I'm still chasing the same sounds. And it's kind of funny because I feel like I'm able to transcend the equipment, in that people are not sure, did you make that with Max, or did you make that on the modular? What did you make that on? And I'm happy about that. Like, I don't want it to be like, oh, that was made with that one thing,
I do create devices based on the performance I'd like to see out of a certain synthesis concept or patching arrangement. Lately it's just been an exercise in making the things capable of performing in a musically predictable way while being able to hit all the sweet spots that the brand is known for.
I'll see someone play, create a patch or an idea, and then I see that I could put another door for them. Basically, I see that as a path where they choose to open certain doors in their creative path. That's where the limitation brings creativity. How do you think of things in a way that to make them approachable, easy to understand and control, but also layer controls so that people can access the most important things quickly, and then as they go deeper, there's always more experience waiting for them. You come to it, you play with it, you get rewarded instantly. It's fun.
I like to make what I call sprinkles for your rack. You get your meat and potatoes from other places. I wanted to make all these modules that could help fill in all these little gaps of these little clicks and pops and weird little digital glitchy stuff.
The users got really powerful, really heady with it, and then of course the manufacturers are going to listen to that, and everything just starts growing. And then I'm like, okay, this is my jam now.
I don't like having too much control, because that, in fact, becomes boring for me.
Some people have a complaint for software, which is too many options. And so hardware limits those options and makes you feel more creative and pushes your creativity.
No 2 days in my job are the same. So one day I might be working on designing a new module. One day I might be interacting with people that I've never met from all over the world. And it is so much fun to hear what people have to say.
By having like our customers interact and make requests, they're essentially shaping the direction of the products too.
It's a lot of fun to design and see this thing that you've created yourself, this idea that you've had, and put it together and see it actually come to fruition.
Every module is a universe. It can be. Oftentimes when we get into synthesis, we just kind of like build our rigs really quickly and it starts to expand a lot faster than our depth of knowledge for any one instrument. So you could spend a year on one module, like if you really want to understand it to its core.
Sometimes it is mind-blowing. You're like, what? How did that sound come out of it? Like, it's unexpected.
Electronic music started in film around the time of Bernard Herrmann, right? He was using it in a nice way, right? But with all of his orchestra. And anyway, that gets into guys like Jerry Goldsmith who are using a nice hybrid, lots of cool keyboards and very, very forward thinking. Then it gets into just everyone has got all kinds of electronic music, and you can't make a film score without having synth beds in the background or synth bass doubling your contrabasses. That goes all the way through to the mid to late 2000s. Then you start getting guys like Cliff Martinez that come in, also doing that, but then the electronic voice is starting to lead way more. And it gets to the point where actually Cliff on the Nick turned off the orchestra and just did an arpeggiator. And like that exploded the world of electronic music composing in film. That is what opened the door for what comes later, which is you've got scores that sound straight out of like a John Carpenter movie. But they are not the ones that lead it. They're cresting the top of the wave that started a few years earlier with Drive and the Nick and that kind of thing.
I think the fact that those guys were writing on some of those instruments put them in that style. See? I hear music editing. I hear modular pieces having been constructed and a really good music editor coming in and shaping this to picture, which you have to do. That's the only way you can write on a modular and keep up with the pace of picture changes. If I were going to do a modular television series, that's what I would do. I would write 25 pieces, tension 1, tension 2, more tension 17, terrified action, and just write a bunch of stuff and then sit down with a music editor every week. And then they would come back to you and say, well, we don't have this transition. Okay, now I have a specific thing to make. But to actually try to score on just a modular without a MIDI keyboard and a computer DAW to put it into and shape it and fit it to picture, I've done it. I did my first film score and it took me 4.5 months. mean, Never Cry Wolf was my first film score. I did it on a Prophet 5 with a Prophet 5 sequencer. That's basically it. But it took a 16-track tape recorder and lots of layering and redoing things over and over and over again. It can be done, but it's a tremendous amount of work. I don't have the time, not in the type of projects that I get offered. I don't get offered the projects where you can take 4.5 months to score a picture. You know, you write the show, and then the director comes over, and they say, you need to change this, you need to change this, you need to change this, and the cut is changed, and that scene is 7 seconds shorter, the scene is 27 frames shorter. All the tempos have to change. One press of a button in a computer environment, and you're done. I have to redo the entire cue in the modular world. I have some modular plugins that respond to the computer commands, but as much as I love it, the process does not help you in the film world. It may help getting an idea going. Sometimes I'll go back there and I just need some ideas. I just need some inspiration. But if you're going to build something that's going to have to be sunk to picture and going to have to respond to notes from a director or from, God forbid, a committee of producers and studio executives and things like that, it's got to be in a DAW that can shift tempo, that can shift key, that can shift stuff like that, because otherwise I would really never see my family.
As far as film goes, that is still always based on the story. If I'm writing the DAW is king because we're working on a story, then I can sync everything and I can be really precise with how I use it. We never know what's going to happen, you know. You just have to roll with the story.
I get stuck sometimes of just having to have that idea, okay, it's in 5 and it's going to be this tempo and it's going to, I'll just stop. I'll go over there where all my all my friends are sitting, they're all wired up, and I'll just go in that other direction. I'll let those instruments tell me what the next step is.
When I'm making music just to make music, then it's absolutely a massive part of what I do. And it's become part of my brain, part of the way I think. I enjoy the way that we organize the time-based parts of composing over here, maybe a little more than on the computer. The computer is more flexible and it's quicker, and after having used it for 20 years, it's like breathing. But it's still a little bit more freeing in a way, and a little more dangerous to do all of the time-based activities on the modular. So I find I like the way that makes me think, so I will write in the modular landscape a lot more. And then I will, if I'm going to add acoustic instruments, usually that's after I lay the groundwork with modular.
The exciting thing about modular is the stuff I do that's not for film work, the records that I make outside, because then I just let the modular process be the modular process, and I don't use a keyboard. I just let the instrument be part of that composition process. Whether it's a sequencer or just control voltages, and just letting random voltages just define a series of events. I'll have an idea of doing something either rhythmic or not arrhythmic, or sometimes not. Just sometimes turn up the VCA and just see what's burbling in there, and let that just sort of guide me. I write so much for film and television that day in and day out, I need an idea, and then I have to execute that idea, and in 3 hours that idea has to be realized and has to be demoed, and the strings have to be there and the bass are there. I really like going back there and saying, what's happening? Ooh, let's do some of that. I never would have thought of that. That's the thing I love about the modulars, why I've been doing them for so many, many years. And even when they were unpopular and unhip and nobody even remembered what they were, this was still set up and I would just go back there. And it just sort of reverses the flow of creativity. And I find it very freeing and just exciting. It's just fun.
I'm very honest about my approach to electronic music. Maybe I'll spark a timbre that strikes my fancy, but then I'll consciously take it to where I want to go and make sure it has depth. But what I see myself doing is I'm writing conventional music using instruments that I create as opposed to instruments of an orchestra.
Often, of course, what I'm doing is free improvisation and what I call following the sound. So rather than trying to predetermine where I might go, it's like, what's this sound telling me? And what if I push it with this CV, what's going to happen, you know? And something happens, and then I get to respond to it. So it becomes a dialogue rather than some sort of directional thing. Hopefully the patch is leading me in many respects. I mean, the patch I have up on the easel right now is one that I stumbled into, but it took like 2 years of explorations until, you know, one day I went, oh, that's the patch, you know, that I've been dreaming of for years, but had never quite found. So, you know, it revealed itself, and luckily I was there to nurture it along.
The instrument has the ability to play itself, which it's hard to say that about any other instrument. And I come from that traditional world of like, you're playing all the time. There's this hard structure, like this is how things are. I started jazz to get out of that. It lets go of every aspect of control that you have, which I think is a really cool thing. It's interesting having that contrast of my needing things to be like absolutely perfect, and then playing this instrument that it's really, I'll turn on and be like, oh crap, like I had never heard that before. That's really cool. I'm gonna record that. It's something that definitely keeps me drawn to modular synthesis.
When pitches are discernible, so that you can tell what pitch it is, we tend to put them into either a discrete form, like D, 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 or they can be squishy. The voice can do it and the violin can do it, but the instrument was built to do discrete pitches in Western culture.
With Morton's music, like I said, I loved the free-form organic structure of it. At the time, I was listening to a lot of music that was very structured and was very linear. It had, sequenced by drum machines and computers, and Morton wasn't doing that. He was using the booklet synthesizer.
So the opening of Silver Apples and Moon is a counterpoint between squishy pitches and discrete pitches. Boom, 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 boom.
It was a very radical way to sequence that he wasn't using a typical musical keyboard. Morton wasn't interested in making 12-tone traditional music. He was interested in doing something completely different. I think it was like the perfect marriage of like a designer and an artist. You have Don, who's creating these amazingly forward-thinking instruments, and then you have Morton, who's also has a vision of creating music that's completely out of this world. Microtonal, and like the structures are, almost liquid and organic.
In my mind at that time, Buchla was going totally in the direction of the composer and the composer's imagination, and the idea of modular systems made the most sense in that world. His setup became much more logical, much more reasonably set up for the composer to use.
To me, it was the most alien, interesting thing, and I wanted to do that.
No matter what you do with pitch, the changing of pitches, is expressive. Pulsation takes over your body. It's an entirely different part of the brain. It's the nervous system. And that's why when you have raves, for instance, they don't need anything else, just a pulse, right? And they can go forever. It energizes you because you lose your individuality. You're taken over by the pulse, and everybody is synchronized.
I've been pursuing that this whole time. I've been pursuing that frictional space of like fluid harmony that really has a motive essence, and then like just kicking bass, just flooring you with rhythm.
Everything starts playing out in a scene, you know, the ambient part, I'm like, oh, everything is beautiful, life is great, and then this dark reverb starts coming in, that's when the clouds come, starts crushing everything, humanity just starts eating itself up, that's where all the distortion starts happening. Then these pummeling beats will start stabbing it, and that's like trying to find its way through all the chaos. After that chaos is kind of like worked out and it's finding its groove, and you know, it's on its mission, you might get this feeling of togetherness. Then you could put a pad in maybe, and that's like calming, but you're still on this hyper mission. It's kind of strange sometimes, like when I'm talking to my friend, oh, we need this part in the song, and I'm telling him the whole story, and I'm seeing the whole movie behind it, and he's just like, whoa, where's this all coming from?
I spend a lot of time thinking about, you know, creating some kind of sometimes like a little bit of a banter, I guess. Because I'm an improviser now, the extent of my composition is sort of setting up a world to sort of interact with and explore in real time. But exactly how, I may know where A is and where B is, but I may have no real idea how I'm gonna get from one to the next. It's like a dance between just listening very, very deeply and letting the breath carry you and letting, you know, your body kind of just say, this is where we're going. And then maybe it's like, oh, nope, I was wrong. Now we're over here. Little detour, that's okay.
I had like all these different frequencies to play with, and I liked them all. I always wanted to like smash them all together and could never figure out how to do that. So I kind of danced around for a while, played in punk bands, played jazz, just like kind of tinkering around, not really heavily into it, but just what I thought I should be doing, you know, if I was gonna be a jazz musician. Just like this mythical universe that I would create, and I would just travel sonically between these different spaces, from jazz to hip hop to punk, and then I started kind of blending them together.
There's something there and it just has to be found. Not understanding exactly how that control voltage is going to affect that FM at that particular ratio, and if you double patch it, what will happen, and just say, what the hell? Oh my God, I never would have thought of that, you know?
But the initial spark is definitely not me and is not the machine, but it's that weird, you know, you call it a muse or eureka or whatever it is, but it requires a certain amount of free fall. It requires a certain amount of trust.
You come up with the sound and you're like, oh shit, I could use this in that piece, but like, no, it sounds better in this piece. And like, sometimes you just have to make a decision. You're like, fuck it, okay, this is where it's going. I don't know why, but it's gonna go here, and I'm gonna move on to the next thing. Like, that's it, you know?
So when I'm patching, I'm looking to attain my aesthetic. I'm looking to be happy and moved, but very often that's because I don't know what's happening until a second later, and I catch up.
My approach is that none of it's intentional, that it's all building off of that emotion the entire time. Like from the second, like I pull all of my patch cables out and I put that first patch cable back in, like it just starts there, it just builds. And that's the emotional connection, right? It's organic. It's building from how you're actually feeling at that moment.
I fire up the rig and I see all the lights turn on, and I just look at it for a while and just wait for it to hit me. I know that there's a song in there. You know, I know that there's something that I have never heard before just waiting there.
It's about knowing enough that you can get there again in that limited moment, Because again, it's a little bit more of a live gesture. It's a little bit more about it happening in the moment, but it's massaging that. It's about, there's some frictional thing about that.
With the modular, you can kind of fly blind a bit. You can actually just go, I'm gonna put this inlet in here and perhaps it's an outlet. But there's certainly plenty of other instances where you'll stumble across a new, sound or something like that. And for me, that's really number one for the modular. It's just that, falling and stumbling into new areas.
When I sit down in front of the modular, I think my first impulse is, let me get a glass of whiskey. Really, it's not this relaxing thing. A lot of the times we just idealize artists maybe and think that it's just this very easy, seamless, I feel inspired, I'm gonna sit in front of my instrument and it's gonna be amazing. No, there's a lot of stress and dread and crippling self-doubt and all of that. But then I try and clear my mind and open my channels to the exchange of energy that is about to happen. I'll start with a sound that I want to make, and then it'll kind of morph into something else. It's an interesting relationship.
I like the challenge of taking an instrument that was essentially built in the 1960s and trying to make it sound modern. After releasing so many albums, I needed to be able to challenge myself, and modular synthesis is not really for the timid.
I try to be as blank as possible and just play. And gradually it begins to come together. I'm always at the level of creating something, and it's in my mind all the time. I try not to have an idea when I sit down.
My goal is really not these machines. The goal is the sound that I get from them. I'm trying to show people ways to just always take what you have and just push it to the limits. That's why I like taking one small sound source and let's see all the sounds I could get out of this one thing,
Playing piano as a young kid, playing trumpet, both very melodic instruments. So part of what I do with modular is I'm a very melodic person. I start my patches with sequences. I take whatever's available, whatever I'm feeling at the moment, and then I build everything else around the sequence, and that's how I do all my patches. And it's just because I have to have that melodic foundation somewhere.
I don't know, as an artist, sometimes I'm able to channel something larger, something beyond myself. There is something coming through us, I think. There's something coming through me or through, anyone who's really in the trance of making music at that moment. And I just want to let that out because I think it's beautiful.
I found the use of modular synths to be completely, freeing is a good word, but it's a complete sort of opposite way of approaching.
The song is written in my head, and I just need to carve it through the wires and through the cables, and I need to bring it to life. It's there, I just need to dig through the steps to get to it, to bring it out.
Sometimes I have a clear concept in my head of what I want to do. Then sometimes something will happen as I'm building the patch where something accidentally will go wrong, and then it steers me down a completely different direction. We're like, oh, this might even be cooler than what I was trying to attempt. Let's explore this idea.
There's music in there. It's happening. It's all just colliding and doing its thing in there, and you have to just find the edges and route it, take some of the confusing parts away and route it a little more specifically in particular directions. And this moment you do one thing, it inspires you to do the next thing.
It's crazy. Yeah, it can go in any direction, but I love that. I love that it can do that. I think when you get into this stuff, your brain's just completely lives in that world all the time. I eat, sleep, shit, this stuff all day long.
I feel like what's more important really is the ideas that I have if I don't have good ideas, like it really doesn't matter if I have the best shit.
There's so many producers out there that would look at this and be like, I could make a record without any of that stuff. And it's right, you could. Is it as fun to make music that way? It's way more fun to make music on a modular or a piece of hardware. The experience, the language between the instrument and the person is completely different. You know, when you're working with the modular, it's like you're interacting with a real instrument. There's vibration, there's resonance, there's like a feel you get that's completely different than with a stagnant sort of computer experience. That's where the big difference is for me.
I don't think I've pushed the record button for maybe 12 years or so. It's been a while.
I've played guitar for like 20 years. I was kind of hitting walls creatively. 2016 was like an intense year. I got married 2 months before my wedding. My mom got diagnosed with cancer. Election year. Music went to the wayside.
Started on guitar at age 12. I moved to synthesizers after a couple failed bands in the DC hardcore scene. And then life things, you know, and I stopped playing.
I went to music school, and that environment nearly squeezed all of the creativity out of me. I had pretty much just been destroyed by trying to play jazz, trying to play something that I wasn't.
My life was pretty rough. Sleeping underneath the bridge and stuff like that, you know, and wondering what's happening in my life. There wasn't really anywhere for me to live, and it was like, things seemed extremely shady, you know? It's like, I feel sometimes a life of artists or anyone in general, you know, things could get really crazy. You could spiral in very weird ways. And I was trying to pull myself out of that, but then all of a sudden I'm gifted this modular synth. And I'm like, I don't know how to use this thing. I start looking on the internet and I'm like, whoa, this thing is worth a lot of money. I should sell this so I could live, you know?
I went into music school feeling very confident in being an improviser that could connect and interact with other people in that present moment to create something bigger than any individual, right? And by the time I left that school, I lost all of my musical self-confidence. Oh, the modular synthesizer. It saved my creativity.
Just weeks before, I was like straight up sleeping, like, not to get too deep into it, but like I was slept, you know, on a concrete floor behind a building, like wondering what's happening in my life. And luckily I started pulling myself together and just like getting myself out of the rut that I created.
I stopped playing music, and an old friend of mine, he had gotten a Make Noise shared system, and I didn't know what that was, you know? I had heard of modular synths, and I had seen modular synths before. He was telling me all about the system. I was like, well, what does it do? You know, like what's so special about it? You know, he's like, man, every module does like 5 things. I was like, well, what do you mean? So like, what do you have in your case? I can't tell you. It's just, it does so much. Like, you know, and so it was mysterious, and I wanted to find out about it. And I happened to be walking from the post office in South Williamsburg, and I walked by the place he was talking about. You know, they had these huge racks and all this stuff, and it seemed pretty cool. And I started just going there, you know? And so I went in, and I eventually met Robert Ike Abrilo. And he would just show me stuff, you know, like, hey, try this, you know, like, you can plug anything into anything. You're not gonna break it, you know? And so, oh, I can explore.
The modular was just like a battle. Like, do I sell this? I'm gonna mess with it a little bit. Do I sell it? And then, you know, waking up at 4 a.m, having these aha moments, like, that's how the oscillator goes in the filter. Then I need something to trigger it. And then it's like, then it started to really make sense to me. And I was a dog walker for many years. And that was such an amazing thing, because I would just be around dogs. They would make me feel happy. And every time I'm walking the dogs, I'm thinking more and more about that modular. Oh wait, I could route this to that. I can't wait to go home and try that. I've been messing with sound for so long, and sometimes I feel like I'm not worthy. I'm like, I am worthy with this, and I will find money how to continue to get the tools. And it was strange, and something that seemed so far out of my reach was just right there.
And so that exploration, that idea of exploration is kind of the center of what saved me. When you're forced to have to build it from the ground up, you start to understand. And I remember being on the floor with this little case I had borrowed from a friend, and I just did a sweep from all the way down to all the way up of the pitch of the oscillator. And that moment felt to me just like the first moment that I had when I played my first electric guitar at age 12. And I just played every string open with the amp all the way up. And there's this feeling of power, this feeling of electricity. It had so much meaning, like so much potential behind it. And so the next like octave of that experience was sweeping that oscillator, and it told me, I could tell, it was like, oh, this is something.
Living in a like MacArthur Park of LA in this like tiny studio apartment and starting to just fill it up with crazy gear, you know? And just being like, my neighbors have no idea the type of spaceship that's getting built, you know?
I actually started playing trumpet as a very straight-ahead classical trumpet player, and I was destined, or so I thought, to be an orchestral trumpet player.
Electronic music began here in Portland when I met a friend, or who became a friend, Douglas Leedy. I was doing early music here in the 70s, playing cornetto, baroque trumpet, drums, crumb horns, recorder.
I was going through the motions and learning the repertoire, and the entire time I was doing that, I had really, really bad stage fright. I used to get so nervous every time I would have to play something, and it was terrible.
I started off my musical career as a bass player, so I played bass in different capacities, different artists, kind of touring, and I was a trained monkey.
One of the reasons why I started playing electronic music and getting into this kind of hybrid, electroacoustic stuff that I do is because it was just the most like liberating, opening thing for me. Like, and just like making terrible noises that were actually not terrible at all. They were really awesome, and it was really exciting.
After doing this for many years, I started to kind of get disillusioned with that whole world of music, and I just wasn't enjoying it anymore, and I was trying to like find an out.
I was staying with him one weekend, and he said, hey, you might like this, and he handed me a Buchla music easel. This is 1976. I had no idea what it was, and he said, yeah, I think you'll like it.
Through playing bass, I kind of figured that I would maybe try and branch out into key bass. So I was like, oh, I'll just get a Voyager, because I know that that's like on a lot of like great funk records. And then I discovered that you could turn the VCA on with a switch, and you didn't have to play the keys anymore.
I was staying upstairs in a little, attic apartment, and I didn't come down for 3 days. I just started moving sliders, and there was no manual.
It was a very simple thing, but that's what changed everything for me in terms of the world of sound. That was the gateway into synthesis for me, just really discovering that, you could decouple sound from harmony.
There was many hours of hardly getting any sound, but then there were these moments that blew my mind, and I realized I was actually creating timbres that I'd never heard before.
I just wanted something else that wasn't linked with traditional harmony and theory, and just focusing on sound and timbres. So I started digging, and I researched Buchla and Eurorack, and eventually I was like, okay, this seems like a good instrument because it will kind of force me out of the confines of like just traditional harmony and theory through playing bass or playing piano and being locked into a note set where the primary focus is the notes that you're playing and not the sounds necessarily.
It forces you to pay attention, and sometimes you just need relief from daily life. pulled into another dimension. And modular does that for me. I'm sitting there having a conversation, a musical conversation with voltage.
I had this vision of what I wanted to achieve with it, and that was an electronic music resource that would be heavy into modular and standalone synths and support mostly local manufacturers here, because Portland's a hotbed of synthesizer activity.
You know, I do talk to artists and I have friends who make music with stuff, but the developer community is like so tight. It's this like, it's like the Eurorack Illuminati, you know? There's like all the other people online and you know, I can't say much more, but they're...
It's been fascinating over the last year to see the variety of people from different age groups, careers, different musical backgrounds. It's not limited to one demographic. It's not just young people. I think there's universal appeal for this stuff. I really do.
I really feel for people that are trying to figure this puzzle out. I mean, it's sort of like when I was trying to learn music theory for the first time, you know? It was so overwhelming, and then I learned a few things, and I was like, I know this shit. Oh man, I got this. Then I learned more, and I was like, oh my God, it's way huger than I thought, and it keeps, you know. But if you have that store where you can just go and spend hours and just patch whatever you want and figure it out, to have someone there to show you stuff, or to just tell you you can plug anything into anything and you won't break it.
I want to be a resource for people, for helping, for supporting the products, transforming a listener into a musician or a creator. I mean, that's kind of what happened to me.
All of these shops are also hosting these sort of like tutorial type of environments and like workshops and like talks and performances and education, and I think that's really cool because, you know, you can still teach people about synthesis and all the same concepts of modular synthesis, because like you can do a lot with next to nothing, you know. It's created this cool sort of like hub.
I really love what's going on with my friends at the Synth Library, giving people opportunities that don't have the money and the resources to use this type of stuff.
S1 is an artist-run nonprofit space, and we host workshops and shows and artists in residence, and we collaborate with different organizations around the Portland community and also internationally. The Synth Library stands at a unique intersection of education and music, and also trying to empower women and historically underserved groups in synthesizers.
I've found ways to connect with people, and this is one of the ways. I want to build community. We're seeing inclusive synth groups pop up on the internet, changing the image of this practice of modular.
Hopefully, as time goes on, we can help shift the entire national culture and idea around what is worth funding and what is valuable. I would like to see a future where education is prioritized and valued by more people, and maybe if we all keep working on it, we'll get there. I think I am a musician, but I think everyone is a musician. I think it's really natural for people to make music, and that we can make music with all kinds of tools.
All of this is just as much of, you know, my identity as any other aspect of my life. This is who I am. And I don't know, I wouldn't have that any other way, really.
Here in Los Angeles and in other communities around the world, really, I think Modular on the Spot has really done a huge amount to just bringing together a community and making it so accessible, making it open to anybody. Anybody could play at Modular on the Spot.
I didn't even realize that there was such a huge community here. It just blew me away. It's just amazing how diverse it is. But there's, you know, there's people that use Buchla, there's people that do a lot of electroacoustic stuff.
So I went to that first Modular on the Spot, and it was amazing. It's out in the park, and it's beautiful. Like, it's not loud, obnoxious. It's very peaceful and meditative, and people were laying out blankets and just chilling and just laying down and just being one with nature.
I remember playing one show. It was like the first night I ever met like Patrick O'Brien, and
he came up to me afterwards and was like, man, that was incredible. I want to learn how to do that. Like, I want to learn how to play live with this stuff.
Man, can I play at your next one? And this is great. I would love to do it. And at that time, we kind of knew each other through commenting on Instagram. And he goes, yeah, I've seen your stuff. Sounds good. Why don't we put you on the next one? I'm like, okay.
I think that modular on the spot is definitely one of the coolest things that has anything to do with music, you know, and the musical community.
I got to meet and start a personal relationship with so many of these people that are making all this amazing new modular stuff.
I could connect with a lot of these people about the same thing, and it was really cool.
I went there and I played, and all of a sudden I had 50 new friends.
People were coming to Modular on the Spot for the first time and seeing it and saying, I want to do that. Whatever you just did was amazing. I want to be able to do that.
Finding them was like finding a community of like-minded people. People were helping each other, people were happy to share tips and tricks, and to strike that in real life with a whole group of people who are happy to do that, who are happy to meet. Oh, it was amazing.
People just sharing, and the same way that I've got gifted modules, that's how I'm sort of being with my friends. You know, I'm trying to give back, like, oh, okay, let's go out to eat or whatever. Oh, I just happen to have a VCA or whatever, here you go.
You don't have such a large community anywhere else where it seems like everyone is just encouraging you to go somewhere. Go do it, do more of what you're doing. Hey, that was cool, you know, which means a lot, right? If you're just doing your first patch and you've never posted anything before, and then you post it and you get someone who you follow, it's like likes it or says that, hey, great job. Then you're, wow. Then you take that confidence into your work, and that's huge.
And some people that were are really talented synthesists, they started liking my songs or just commenting and giving me encouragement, and I was just like, okay, maybe I can keep doing this.
This community is embracing this, and so you just get this energy from everyone.
The instrument's about, connection and frequency. And the community is actually mimicking that, connection and conversation. So a lot of us, we stay patched into each other.
There's something magical and very special about sound across language barriers. We can all listen to the same sounds, and if those sounds are done well, they evoke very specific feelings. And as a musician, to get to work in an environment where you're a part of that process, it's phenomenal. It's almost like we're building spaceships here.
To see this thing grow and become what it is now, I'm just stoked to be here and glad to be a part of it.
I want people to feel something deeper. I want to kind of drive people to think about something. I don't know, hopefully it's a healing process for certain people as well, when they hear whatever I'm doing. It's a healing process for me, but if I can take them on that journey as well, right, maybe that opens them up to deeper understanding of whatever they're going through. And that's super important for me.
The explosion in the modular world is awesome, and the support in the community, it's like, just go for it.
Do what you enjoy, Music itself is soothing to the soul, so to speak. So I just like playing by myself, or getting together with friends and patching shit up.
It's the rebirth of wonder and curiosity, which is going to be something that gets us through these future years.